My name is Jacob Perez. For folks that don't know who I am, I currently am the Director of Marketing and Communications for PSR. I am actually an alum of PSR as well. I graduated in 2021 with my Master's in Theological Studies here from PSR. I'm currently the Vice President and going to be in about 2 months the President of the PSR Alumnus Council, which is the destination for hopefully all of the students presenting today and more. And our work is really to generate engagement amongst the alums, both in participation and in donations, through supporting the institution. And then one of my other hats that I wear is I am also the conference manager for the American Academy of Religion Western Region, which just held their annual academic conference just a few weeks ago at Arizona State University. So needless to say, I am very excited to hear what I am seeing today presented from the students, and have really enjoyed the work that was presented in panel one. But we'll get going right away here for panel number two. The theme is doing. This is the second part of our conference, if you will, our symposium. We will have three presenters today, and then after each of those presenters, we will go into our breakout rooms. The question that I want us to be holding with us as we listen to these presentations: what new pathways of doing resonates most with us and why? And how might these possibilities of doing transform our own context in unexpected ways? So with that, without further ado, I'm going to turn to our first presenter. Minister Bobby Wiseman is going to be presenting Futuring the Now, the Making of New Presence. Minister Bobby, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I know this is post-lunch, and from many of meetings, there's that feeling of wanting to get comfortable and whatnot. I can only be myself to do this now. So y'all, let's get ready for this journey. Jacob, thank you so much for that stellarific introduction. I am in the Mass program. I'm a current minister at Ecclesia Deliverance in the Church of God in Christ. I'm a proud dad, grandfather, and great-grandfather, parent of an 18-year-old lad, that's baby boy, and a huge and true Star Trek fan, and I love Lucy. As for me, I am committed and convicted to keep on doing. For my keep on doing, there's a couple of people I must thank for that. My mama, my pastor, my first lady, Barb, Carl, the Right Reverend NJ, Veronica, Dr. Leonard, who keeps on pushing, Dr. Alexander, and Dr. Lisa, for various reasons. I'm committed and convicted to share my visions and a vision. H.G., also known as Howard Thurman, stated, "There is a bottomless resourcefulness in man that ultimately enables him to transform the spear of frustration into a shaft of light. Under such circumstances, even one's deepest distress becomes so sanctified that a vast illumination points the way to the land one seeks. This is God in man. Because of it, man stands in immediate candidacy for the power to absorb all the pain of life without destroying joy. Futuring the now, the making of new presence. This joyous journey has three significant landmarks. Landmark 1, the past. Landmark 2, the present. And landmark 3, tomorrow. Landmark 1, the past, aka my journey of mental and physical health. Landmark 2, the present, aka my journey of being in and out of systems, structures, the work. And finally, landmark 3, tomorrow, my continuous joyous journey of relationships, faith, belief, possibility, ability, and opportunity. Futuring the now, the making of new presence. Past, a tomorrow that has a balance of joy and creativity. A tomorrow that has the potential to never get tired. A tomorrow that forces me to stop, think before reacting. A tomorrow that forces creative moments. A tomorrow that has many one-to-one conversations that expand to two. A tomorrow that is not constrained by a descriptor, yet is enlarged by a mere converse. A tomorrow that has the joy of cupcakes baked in a bundt pan. A tomorrow that can have genitalia, denominational, structural, financial, mental health, or getting by conversations that are not covered in fluff by genitalia. A tomorrow that provides for graceful entries and the utmost understanding and dignity. A tomorrow with the pomp and circumstance of Mozart, the undertones of James Hall, the smoothness of Metallica, and the quiet boldness of AC/DC. A tomorrow that is not so motivated or defined by what things appear, yet a tomorrow is that is. A tomorrow shaped by yesterday's hope and tomorrow's twice removed uncertainty. A tomorrow that is deeply rooted and grounded in what is just, right, and honest. A tomorrow that meanders to my generation's next. New presence, present. Dream, imagine, rinse, repeat. Dream, imagine, rinse, repeat. Repeat, rinse, imagine, dream. Redo, wash away, create, ponder. Rehash, clean it out, make from scratch, think harder than hard. Dream, imagine, rinse, repeat. Dream what you will not give into. Dream what you will give up easily. Dream what you will not live into. Dream what you will give for life, give for living. Rinse the thoughts of others with and by your thoughts. Rinse the dust bunny and cobwebs of your into life. Scratch into the depth of your living in life so that there is life in your living. Scratch into the wonder, excitement, and wondering, pondering. Dream, rinse, imagine, repeat. Dream the notes that you see, smell, and feel. Dream the you that you hear in the beats. Dream the ponder of the instrument of you. Imagine the image of you that has been. Imagine the image of you that is. Imagine the image of you that will be. Imagine the image of you that is imageless to others. Rinse, rinse, repeat. Rinse, rinse, rinse. Rinse what is not. Rinse what is. Rinse what can be. Rinse what is what. Rinse, repeat, imagine, dream. Repeat, rinse, imagine, dream. Dream, imagine, rinse, repeat. Dream, imagine, rinse, repeat. Repeat the dream. Dream the rinse. Rinse the imagine. Imagine the dream. New presence tomorrow. Imagine the image of you that has been. A tomorrow that is not so motivated or defined by what things appear, yet a tomorrow is that is. Repeat, rinse, imagine, dream. Rinse, repeat, imagine, dream. A tomorrow that forces creative moments. Imagine the image of you that is, a tomorrow shaped by yesterday's hope and tomorrow's twice removed uncertainty. Repeat, rinse, imagine and dream. Repeat, rinse, imagine and dream. A tomorrow that forces and compels creative moments. Imagine the image of you that will be, shall be, can be. Dream, imagine, rinse, repeat. Dream, imagine, rinse, repeat. A tomorrow that forces more and more creativity. Imagine the image of you that is imageless to others. A tomorrow that is not constrained, yet is enlarged by a mere conversation. Dream, imagine, rinse, repeat. Dream, imagine, create, create, imagine, dream, dream, imagine, dream into imagine, dream, imagine into create, dream into the depth of living in life so that there is life in living. Imagine the depth of living in life so that there is life. Create into the depths of living in life so that there is dreaming, imagining, creating. This vision, this joyous vision, has the unique opportunities of growth, encouragement, engagement, and creative conversations at the Friday Night Club. This vision compels one and my own self, because I wrote this, to look inward, if not deeply inward, then outward, as a way of engagement versus disengagement, as a way of relating versus retaliation, as a way of hospitality versus hostility. This vision recognizes and acknowledges the given truths and trueness, and at the very same time, acknowledge and articulates what can be in a way that sees the similar, diverse, the conflictual, complementary, the supportive, oppositional, the known, unknown, crafting a collaborative sight vision, not for quote unquote one, yet a collective all. My visions are my oak tree. These visions hear, feel, and see. Now, my title is Featuring the Now, the Making of New Presents. There's a present that's a gift that keeps on giving and giving. Dr. Blake, you are and were a gift. You are a present. You are still physically here. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm not sorry. A present that was not dressed up, yet was baritone fancy. A present that is just right in its irregular, simple, priceless complexity. Presents that continue to gift. Oak tree appreciations for being able to do as a present and be present in the moments. And doing, hearing, and being because we can. Thank you.
Minister Bobby, thank you. That, when I was taking some notes, the thing that I wrote was, this is what it looks like when the prophetic, when the poetic, when the academic, and when the apostolic all converge. That was a brilliant presentation, a vision of tomorrow, an invitation for us to dream, imagine, create, rinse, and repeat. And the line that I wrote down, it's a future where there is life in our living. Thank you for that. We will move on now to our second presentation by Veronica Schindler. The title of that is Pastoral Care for Supporters of Those Whose Lives Are Disrupted by the Criminal Justice System. Veronica, good to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacob. Hi, I'm Veronica Schindler. PSR is my first stop on my journey to become a prison chaplain. My presentation is a summary of my chapter written last spring for Dr. McMahon's Pastoral Care for Marginalized Bodies class. The title of my presentation is Pastoral Care for Supporters Whose Lives Are Disrupted by the Criminal Justice System. It was 1982 when I first walked into a courtroom supporting a loved one in trouble with the criminal justice system. My presentation is about pastoral care providers supporting people who are supporting loved ones through the criminal justice system. I will refer to the people caught up in the criminal justice system as loved ones, and their family and friends who stand by them as supporters. Loved ones' lives have been disrupted, and supporters choose to walk into that disruption with their loved ones. I argue that pastoral care providers need to know about the criminal justice system and the needs of supporters to provide care for supporters during this time of stress and stigma. Pastoral care providers, this may be you, and it is me, have been trained to be with people during times of suffering, to help them find life-giving theologies and help them know that God is present with them on their journey. This requires comfort with uncertainty, embodying compassion, and having a list of resources to offer when the needs of the supporter are beyond the scope of pastoral care. Pastoral care providers need a basic knowledge of the criminal justice system and the needs of supporters. I will walk you through the stages of the incarceration cycle and share what I needed during that stage and how I envision pastoral care providers can help meet that need. The first stage is disclosure. This is when the supporter finds out that their loved one is in trouble. This can be a phone call from the jail cell or a conversation with the loved one where they tell the police they tell you that the police want to talk to them. During this time, I needed to talk to people I trusted to maintain my confidentiality and know I was welcome in my communities. For pastoral care providers in a church setting, this could be a conversation with a congregant who comes to you with this information and seeks guidance. They may need to know that their church is still available to them and where God is in this. They may also want to know if their loved one should hire an attorney or talk to the police. The quick answers are yes, they need an attorney, and no, they should not talk to the police. And if the police come talk to the supporter, they do not have to speak to the police. This disclosure stage ends when the loved one is arrested, appears in court, or the statute of limitations expires. The second stage is court and jail. This stage starts with the loved one being arrested or summoned to court for an arraignment. The supporter will want to visit their loved one in jail and attend significant court hearings. Significant court hearings are the arraignment, trial, or acceptance of a plea deal, and sentencing. I argue that the supporter should never go to court alone. There is always an element of the unknown when entering the court, and the supporter may understandably become emotionally distraught, triggering first-order pre-critical language and an inability to comprehend all that is said during the court hearing. Additionally, they may be unable to drive home safely after the hearing. I always ask for one or two people to accompany me to court to take notes and drive home. I argue that pastoral care providers need to be present to pray with the supporters before and/or after court hearings and help the supporter unpack what happened in the hearing and how it will impact their loved one and themselves. The supporter may also need moral support to navigate other elements of this stage, like securing bail and/or determining how and when to visit their loved one in jail. Having pastoral care providers on the payroll of city and county courthouses and jails who are available to go into the courtrooms with supporters and are present to greet supporters during jail visits would provide the grounding and spiritual aid that supporters and staff need. Additionally, the supporter may need to close up the loved one's life by contacting the loved one's boss or landlord, moving their stuff into storage, canceling services, etc. The loved one's attorney can assist the supporter with getting power of attorney for the loved one to allow the supporter to take care of business. Pastoral care providers may have resources to help the supporter navigate these tasks. The court and jail stage ends after the loved one stands trial or accepts a plea deal and is either released or sentenced to additional time in jail for a short term or prison for a longer term sentence. The third stage is going into prison to visit the loved one. I have visited 3 jails and 4 prisons in my life, and each one had different procedures and rules that I had to navigate. I always felt anxious going into prison, and I navigated these feelings by calling a safe person, speaking my thoughts and expectations while setting my intention for my time with my loved one. Another challenge for supporters is loneliness, which is the absence of meaningful relationships with people experiencing similar feelings and interactions. Just as people choose to walk away from incarcerated individuals, people also walk away from supporters because they decide to stay in relationship with their loved ones. Additionally, the institutional procedures and rules of visiting do not allow for building intimate relationships with other visitors. Supporters must hear similar stories to theirs to know they are not alone. Chaplains need to be available to supporters during visiting hours. I envision 1 or 2 chaplains holding group meetings the hour before and the hours after shift change and the end of visiting. These are open meetings supporters can attend to talk about their experiences. The chaplains would also be available during check-in and the visiting hours to pray with and listen to supporters. Chaplains would share their office number so supporters could reach out as needed during the week. Pastoral care providers can also assist supporters in finding resources during this stage when they are without their loved one's income and support. For example, just getting to and from prisons, which aren't generally in the neighborhood supporters live in, can be a hardship. States may have transportation or financial assistance for families to visit their loved ones. And where appropriate, pastoral care providers can also contribute to bridging that gap. There may be publications available to help supporters find the assistance they need. Pastoral care providers have connections and resources to find information that may not be available to the supporter and can pass it along as needed during the journey. The last stage is when the loved one is released from jail or prison. This is joyous and can be challenging. For me, the challenge came up a few years after my loved one was released, when I realized how alone I felt in my experience and that I needed to talk to others who had similar experiences. For others, the challenge may be integrating the loved one into their life. Up until now, the supporter has been separated from the loved one by the carceral state. Now the supporter has to adjust to the loved one being around and having immediate needs. The loved one may have changed from their incarceration experience. The loved one, having been imprisoned, has been conditioned out of their sense of agency and self-determination. The loved one is also carrying the trauma of what they experienced in prison. That trauma may become PTSD and impact the loved one's relationship with behaviors that are unexpected and appear irrational. The loved one needs to unlearn unlearn what they learned in prison and recover from the trauma of prison, which often takes significant time and may be frustrating for both the supporter and the loved one. The supporter may feel anxiety, fear, hope, frustration, or disappointment during this stage. The supporter may be judging their feelings in themselves and need to talk with someone to help them unpack and understand these worries and fears. Pastoral care providers with whom the supporter has created relationships during the first 3 stages of the incarceration cycle must be available to hold space and help the supporter find meaning and a life-giving theology in this 4th stage. This meaning-making and life-giving theology is critical for the health and wellness of the supporter and their ability to have a healthy, supportive relationship with their loved one. Meaning-making and theology are lifelong processes, and pastoral care providers have the privilege and honor of walking this journey with supporters. You may not think you know people from the criminal justice system has impacted, or this may be familiar territory to you. People with felony convictions account for 8% of the overall population and 33% of the African American male population. That is a whole lot of people. The shame and stigma of the criminal justice system do not allow people to share their experiences. I argue that pastoral care providers need to talk about the ideas, notions, and racism of the criminal justice system and the impact of prisons on the people caught up in the system and society from the pulpit. Talking about the criminal justice system will let your congregation know you are open to them sharing their experiences. Speaking of criminality and the system from the pulpit lets those impacted by the criminal justice system know this is a safe place. You are welcome here, and increases the likelihood that a supporter will reach out to you. In conclusion, pastoral care providers have a unique opportunity to support people caught up in the criminal justice system. In this community of service, supporters are a group that has long been neglected. Supporters deserve to be prioritized for services that show them the path to a life-giving theology. By having pastoral care providers journey with them, remind them that God is in the room, hold space for what they cannot share with others, and have comfort with uncertainty while embodying compassion. Thank you for your attention.
Veronica, thank you so much. That was such a brilliant display of what I would describe as pastoral presence, pastoral pragmaticism combined with pastoral preparedness. What I loved about that presentation is the way in which you're advocating, you're arguing, you're presenting a case for seeing the unseen, the folks that we may not immediately think about when we think about this type of ministry, those supporters of those loved ones, and calling out the stress, naming the stress, the shame, the stigma, and creating really like a practical field guide for approaching that. Incredible work, and a reminder that we truly do not do this work alone. So thank you very much, Veronica, for that. We're going to continue with our next presentation by Roseanne Sino, and the title of this presentation is Joining with Nature, reading Joel chapter 2, 1 through 17 in our time of ecological crisis. Roseanne, thank you for being with us today. I'll turn the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, so I'm Roseanne Sino. I am just finishing up my MTS degree with a focus on ecotheology. And the focus of my work is getting more people of faith engaged in ecological justice work and care for creation. As Jacob mentioned, my paper is Joining with Nature, reading Joel chapter 2, verses 1 through 17 in our time of ecological crisis. Earth and her inhabitants are facing ever-increasing ecological crises driven by human behavior. Climate change, the breakdown of essential Earth systems, loss of biodiversity, the pollution of land, air, and water, all threaten Earth and all who live upon her, human and other than human. Yet we humans continue to do very little to reverse or even stop the destruction. In a time like this, we desperately need prophetic voices to spur us to what Pope Francis has called an ecological conversion, a conversion of the heart that will lead us to act before it is too late. Now, turning to ancient texts in a time like this might seem kind of silly. Like, what can they possibly tell us? Yet the prophet Joel in the Hebrew scripture speaks perfectly to this moment. Written at a time when Israel seemingly faced ecological disaster due to swarming locusts, Joel offers us a guide for motivating ourselves and others to act for eco-justice today. I'm going to offer a close look at the book of Joel, chapter 2, verses 1 through 17, to show how the prophet subverts biblical motifs, uses dramatic verbs, and employs poetic parallelism to grab his audience's attention and make them not only hear, but feel the devastation they and the natural world are experiencing. The only way through it, Joel tells us, is for humans to join in nature's lament and to ask for God's mercy and guidance so we may act wisely for the survival of all. So let's start by looking at how Joel chapter 2, 1 through 17, which is written in the form of biblical poetry, draws on familiar biblical motif, yet subverts them to astounding effect. The passage begins with the call to sound the trumpet in verse 1, a motif that we find throughout Hebrew scripture, usually as a call to assemble for worship or to prepare against an invading foreign army. But here it is used to announce what Joel is calling the day of the Lord, when God is coming to destroy Israel. Wow. Joel's use of the phrase the day of the Lord here is also subversive, because the day of the Lord was commonly understood by ancient Israel to be a time when God would take vengeance against Israel's enemies, not against Israel itself. Through these two subversions, Joel chapter 2 immediately escalates in the minds of its audience the sense of calamity. And this escalation continues with a third major subversion here. Joel employs in this chapter the motif of the invading foreign army, a motif that occurs throughout the Hebrew scripture. We see it, of course, in Chronicles and Kings and throughout a lot of different prophetic texts. Yet in this instance, Joel in verses 5 through 7 tells us that this set of invaders is only like a powerful army, only like warriors, only like soldiers. These invaders darken the skies as they come. They leap, they crackle and devour. They scale walls. They're not stopped by weapons. They climb into houses, oh my goodness, and enter windows. This language makes plain this is not your typical human army, but most probably the swarm of locusts that Joel described in his first chapter. This second chapter then is meant to shock the audience with the scale and import of this ecological disaster, taking these familiar biblical motifs and subverting them to heighten the feeling both of horror and the need to take action. Furthering this escalation, too, are the dramatic verbs that occur in the verses 1 through 17 of Joel, which function like powerful stage direction for the audience's imagination. Just listen to the language Joel uses in just the first 10 verses. After his call to sound the trumpets in verse 1, all inhabitants of the land, not just humans, are said to shake. Fire devours and burns in verse 3 as the invaders charge, leap, crackle, and devour everything in their path. People anguish and grow pale, he says in verse 6, as the army leaps, runs, and climbs into human dwelling spaces, unable to be halted. Even earth herself quakes and the heavens tremble, he says in verse 10. In response, the people are commanded to fast, to weep, to mourn in verse 12, and rend their hearts, sanctify, assemble, and gather in verse 15. Notice that none of these verbs are passive. They're not quiet or reserved. They're active and they're vivid. They do not hide the horror affecting Earth community, but instead demand that the audience picture and feel that horror for themselves to motivate them to act with required urgency. These first 17 verses in Joel's second chapter also employ poetic parallelism to further escalate the sense of ecological crises. While there are many poetic parallels in these verses, a few are particularly striking. In verse 2, for example, Joel uses what is called an intensifying parallel, a pair of lines in which the second line underscores and magnifies the first to emphasize the historic magnitude of what is transpiring. Joel tells us, "The army's like has never been from of old, nor will it be again after them in ages to come." Wow. Similarly, the unprecedented disaster is also shockingly presented in verse 3 using a contrasting parallel. Here, Joel tells us that the land, which was like the Garden of Eden before the invaders arrived, has become a desolate wilderness afterward. He builds to the climatic line, and nothing will escape them. That's shocking, isn't it? The machine-like and unstoppable precision of these invading locusts is then described with these horrifying parallels in verses 7 and 8. Joel writes, "Each keeps to its course. They do not swerve from their paths. They do not jostle one another. Each keeps to its tracks. They burst through the weapons and are not halted." Wow. In case the audience is still unclear as to the seriousness of this disaster, a parallel in verse 11 dispels any uncertainty. Here, the prophet declares, "Truly the day of the Lord is great, terrible indeed. Who can endure it?" Well, by now the answer to this question should be obvious. The only ones who may endure it are maybe the uncountable locusts themselves that he mentions in verse 11, but likely no one else and nothing else. Finally, and perhaps most importantly for what I'm talking about today, Joel chapter 2, 1 through 17 underscores that if humanity is to survive, it must join with nature in its lament over this ecological devastation and ask for God's mercy and guidance to go forward. In the first chapter of Joel, the prophet tells us that the ground itself and all the animals are already in mourning. Yet in this passage, in chapter 2, he ratchets up the scale of the disaster's effect on nature. Now the earth, sun, moon, and stars are said to be mourning as well in verse 10. Joel makes an explicit call to humans in verses 12 through 17 to turn back to God, to gather together, to beg for mercy, and to join nature's lament. Yet Joel shocks the audience even further by saying, even if the people take all of these actions, he says, who knows whether God will turn and relent? Wow. These verses taken together suggest that there will be no easy escape from this ecological disaster. Humans can no longer be complacent or view themselves as apart from the devastation that nature is already experiencing. Instead, they must learn from nature's mourning and from its cries to God and follow nature's lead. Joel calls on humanity to come together in community, both to acknowledge its part in the crisis and to ask for God's mercy and grace to stop the destruction. It is only by changing of the heart, this ecological conversion, that there can be hope for the future. In sum, then, the second chapter of Joel offers us a powerful example for today. By subverting biblical motifs, employing dramatic verbs, and using poetic parallelism, Joel magnifies the sense of the ecological devastation and the need for human action if anyone or any part of Earth community is to survive. The passage shocks its audience by implying that humans cannot simply ignore or outsmart this disaster as they might wish to believe. Instead, the only way forward is for the people to humble themselves and recognize their dependence on nature, on each other, and on God. Despite its ancient origins, then, Joel's message is more than timely for us today. We who are called to be today's prophetic voices can and must follow Joel's lead. We need to speak out powerfully to break through human denial and arrogance and motivate our communities and ourselves to mourn with nature and then to act to reverse the devastation. As in Joel's time, if we continue to ignore Earth's cries, it will be too late. Today is the day to sound the trumpets. Are we up to that call?
Roseanne, thank you so much. That was incredible. Um, Folks that know anything about me know that I grew up Pentecostal, right? And so we talk a lot about the spiritual gift of knowledge. That was a Holy Spirit divinely sent gift of demonstration of the gift of knowledge. Thank you so much for that right dividing of the word of truth, that call for the ecological conversion, the changing of our hearts. And as ministers, as folks that are called in any of our fields of works, we can and must follow Joel's lead. I so appreciate you saying that, breaking through the current denial and arrogance that defines our times. Roseanne, thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Ish Ruiz, who's a faculty member here at PSR. Dr. Ish, thank you again for your time and joining us, and I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Amazing. Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Dr. Astudillo for having me as a respondent to our panel, to our wonderful panel. Greetings from Chicago. I travel back today. Hope to make it to class tomorrow. So send a prayer for me. All right. My response to this panel is actually, this is the title of the response, is Toward a Glitchy Theology of Liminality and Interconnectedness. What unites us with each other and with our world? Well, that's a tough question. Perhaps it's faster to answer what separates us. Is it prison bars? Is it the categorical distinctions between being human, animal, plant, or mineral? Is it the chronos-based categories of present and future? And how strong are these barriers that create separateness? Can they be disrupted, and how? The three stellar presentations we witnessed today all shed light on a different element of interconnectedness and the quest to disrupt that which separates and dehumanizes us. You do it by doing it. While reading some versions of these papers, I was captivated by a story that Minister Bobby wrote in his paper. In his paper, he asked artificial intelligence to generate a vision of futurity. And AI generated the vision. And when he downloaded the vision, AI had split the vision into two, and it was kind of glitchy. But the glitch contained beauty and meaning for him about imagination and about the future. So I began to wonder, what is a glitch? How do we experience glitches in our life? And what happens during these glitches? Okay. I propose the following. Glitches represent a liminal space, an in-between space where God's grace can potentially unfold and propel us toward liberation. And sometimes that means disruption. So what does it mean to disrupt? It means to become a glitch in the system, the agent of God's grace flowing through our lives. In that sense, these papers are all very glitchy papers. And yes, that is a compliment. Okay. Veronica's excellent paper on prison ministry supports for supporters of incarcerated persons amounts to a pastoral theology that is important in today's world. The paper does not really operate, however, in the way we expect it to. See, when we think about prison ministry, most of us, myself included, we tend to think about the incarcerated person themselves. We think about rehabilitation, including spiritual rehabilitation, those in the penitentiary system. Instead, Veronica takes us on a journey of solidarity with those who accompany the incarcerated. Furthermore, she reframes their identity not as inmates, but as loved ones, as the beloved. What an excellent example of interconnectedness. I thank you, Veronica, for the reminder that we are not all that separate from each other, and that when one suffers, all suffer. Thank you for being a glitch in this system that is often so unjust and separates us. This brings me to the Gospels. Let us remember that Jesus too underwent a process of incarceration and even capital punishment. He too was a loved one. Let us remember that his mother felt a sword pierce her heart. when he was going through his passion, and that the people of Jerusalem wept for him, some of them did, while he carried his cross. What would it be like to hold Mary as she feels sorrow? What would it be like to comfort the weeping crowds? That is your role as ministers, especially those of you who will do prison ministry. Veronica's glitchy paper disrupts the prison bars, as well as the space that separates us as humans. Suffering becomes the avenue through which solidarity is forged. And let's face it, we don't like to suffer any more than we like a glitch. But what we do with the suffering and how we harness it to disrupt the dehumanization we often feel due to the unjust system, that is what matters, what we do with it. Okay? Can we lean into the glitch? Can we become system glitches ourselves in a society that tries to deprive us from our humanity and tries to separate us? I'll let you think about that. Another form of prevalent disconnection in our world relates to the way we have mistakenly constructed the idea that we are somehow separate from our environment. We have forgotten our interconnectedness with the world. We have forgotten that humanity is not humanity without the integral ecology we are immersed in, and that we must foster, nurture, and steward that ecology. Roseanne's poignant examination of the book of Joel reminds us of this interconnectedness and the need to care for our world. Her glitchy argument represents an active call to action for the sake of our world and for the sake of ourselves. The time for environmental justice is now. We must become glitches to the forces of lethargy, apathy, and anthropocentrism that prevents us from connecting with our world. Let us heed the wisdom of Chief Seattle, who famously challenged the white settlers with these words, and I quote, "Every part of the earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insects, all are holy in the memory and experience of my people. The rivers are our brothers, they quench our thirst, they carry our canoes and feed our children. So you must give the rivers the kindness that you would any brother. Are we part of the land? As we are part of the land, you too are part of the land. This earth is precious to us. It is also precious to you. One thing we know, there is only one God. No man, be he red man or white man, can be apart. We are all brothers after all." End quote. Chapter 2 of Joel's book is glitchy. It subverts the idea of the day of the Lord, and the invading army. And these notions we once associated with our political enemies are redeployed in the form of self-examination. We are the ones hurting God by hurting our world. And they are responding to our abuse. The poetic glitchy parallelism kickstarts what Roseanne hopes will be an emotionally fueled urgency toward the ecological justice and and to sound the trumpets that foster interconnectedness with our world. But how do we do it? How do we foster interconnectedness? How do we become the glitches to the forces that separate us? How do we act? How do we engage in doing, in glitching, in this world that bombards us with a million ideas and direction, a world that continues to take from us? Here I return to Minister Bobby's brilliant refrain: dream, imagine, rinse, and repeat. How do we do it? By creating, by entering into spaces that bring about our creativity. Futurity and imagination drives hope-filled action. It is one of the greatest sources of hope that we humans have access to, our ability to imagine. It is what allows us to have access to our past and our ancestors and our elders. We have to imagine their lives too. I thank our presenters for guiding us in entering the liminal space that separates us from each other, that separates us from the world, and that separates us from the future kingdom of God, which hopefully is not that far away. Hopefully, it can be made present today. Thank you for guiding us as we explore the in-between spaces between how things are and how they should be. I thank Minister Bobby for framing the importance of imagination and for reminding us that the future is not that far away, not that far out from today. We just have to dream, imagine, rinse, and repeat. I thank Veronica for imagining a framework for a life-giving pastoral ministry for our loved ones in the prison system. Being human means that when one suffers, all suffer, and we all need support as we continue to grow in love. And I thank Roseanne for reminding us of our interdependence to the earth and for helping us understand how the authors of our scriptures call us to greater forms of responsible living with deep love and consideration for the church. And yes, sound the trumpets. Thank you all for doing glitchy theology. Thank you for becoming glitches in the system. May your journey here at PSR and beyond continue to fuel your beautiful vocations, and may they continue to yield fruit. And let the church say, Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Ruiz, for that invitation to engage in the glitching. That was incredible. Thank you for that response, and thank you again for joining us.
We are now to our third panel on disruption. And before we get started, I'm just going to share a few words about the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake. We've named that the entire symposium was conceived as a small offering dedicated to that intention of honoring Dr. Blake. And I believe we might have his brother with us today, Dr. Carl Blake. But I just want to say a few words in particular right now as we begin this third panel on disruption. So good afternoon, everyone. Greetings to all time zones. It is an honor, and it is no small thing to speak these words today in this place about someone whose life itself was a living word, a sermon in flesh, a prayer in motion, a disruption of despair. I'm going to attempt to honor the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake, and nothing I say can fully do justice to that. But I think we will do that for the rest of our lives. Dr. Blake was our teacher, our colleague, a man whose very being, I would argue, and I have told him this, was a moral achievement, one of the greatest I have ever known. I have to say, I'm still in shock over the loss of Dr. Blake. I am still somewhat in denial. I wasn't ready to lose him at all. I guess we never are. My feelings are both profound and mundane. You know, I want to dig into his work, study the dissertation he wrote called Including Afrocentrism in Theological Education at the Graduate Theological Union, 1996. I also have strange regrets. You know, he was going to drive me to my first PSR faculty retreat when I first started at PSR, but my flight got delayed. So now what I have is the voicemail he left me, where he was welcoming me and greeting me and trying to work out the best route to get us on time with the traffic, and calculating with great patience the time that it would take to drive me, how we could do it, and how he was so looking forward to the pleasure of my company. And he already sounded like a friend. He'd never met me. You know, I wish I had longer to sit before him and listen to him and be with him and hear his stories and advice and knowledge. And I can't even believe I had the honor of sharing time and space with him. How did I get the gift of that time? How did I get so lucky? And why couldn't I slow down to be more present while I had it? But when I think of Dorsey's face, there is no judgment. There is only love, a glint in his eye, and I carry him with me now. On November 7th, 2023, Dr. Blake was chosen to give the 48th Annual Graduate Theological Union's Distinguished Faculty Lecture. And as he started his talk, he spent, I think, the first 5 or 7 minutes just meticulously thanking people. And he took his time. And by the end of it, you just felt so full and so thanked and so abundant. When he shared his memory of the first time he met Howard Thurman, and his memory of the first time he heard a sermon by Dr. Howard Thurman, he shared the details. His memory was so tangible and detailed, and he spoke of the pew that he sat in, which wasn't even a real pew. It was like added from the choir loft, and he was all the way in the back, and how he held his face in his hands through most of Dr. Thurman's sermon, and how deeply he felt seen, and how important he felt it was to be seen, and how important it was to give people the gift of feeling seen. I feel like he moved through this world like water, like light, like sound. If you ever heard him pray, it was not a performance. It was invocation. I felt like when he prayed, didn't matter where we were, but the ceiling would just open up. And suddenly we weren't in a classroom or a chapel anymore, but we were somewhere else entirely. A realm of the real, the beautiful, the deeply beloved. And we were held in a language that made us remember we belonged to something ancient, something liberatory, something that refused to let us go. Dr. Blake knew that being is not passive. He understood that to show up fully human, fully rooted, fully awake was a radical act in a world that demands we fragment ourselves. When I arrived at PSR, I was, brand new. I was still finishing my PhD. I was unsure of my place. Dr. Blake met me with reverence, not just respect, but reverence. Dr. Blake was a truth teller, not the kind that cuts to wound, but the kind who wielded truth with care, like a scalpel in the hands of a healer. His lectures were liberation songs. He often opened his classes with music. His stories were portals. His analysis held history and hope in the same breath. He taught with gravitas and the fire of the prophets. I would watch him in meetings, forums, classrooms, speaking slowly, methodically, as if truth wasn't in a rush, because it didn't need to be. He could name a contradiction with compassion and leave everyone in the room with their dignity intact. If this conference is about being unafraid, then it is about Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake. I would say he was a living embodiment of fearless love. Not bravado, not performance, but an unwavering insistence that love must be the final word. He reminded us the work is not just about what we do, but how we do it and who we are becoming in the process. Many of us have heard the quote by Howard Thurman, where he says, "Do not ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it." Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake was alive with spirit, alive with fire, alive with love, and he dared to live that way in public every day. His legacy is not just what he taught, but it's how he lived. He crossed boundaries. He was a bridge. He was committed to the human and all of life project of figuring it out together, honoring our sacred interconnectedness, building solidarity that was rooted in relationship and beloved community. These are real concepts to him that he committed his whole life to working out. How to do beloved community. And he walked with so much integrity that it shifted the pH balance of the room. And I think invited all of us to walk with more care and more kindness and more courage. So again, there is no way to fully honor Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake, and I do believe that we will all do that for the rest of our lives, with our lives. And now we get to live the questions he lived, tell the truths he told, embody the grace as best we can that he modeled. So to the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake, we thank you. We hope that you can feel our thanks. We thank you for the great honor of the time with you, and honor the time we have with one another. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and let us continue the great work ahead. So I am very excited by the set of panelists that we have on this third panel on disruption. We are starting off today with Lewis Knox, who has a paper called "Somebody Has Stolen Jesus: What is Problematic with a White Jesus and What It Would Mean If Jesus Had Remained a Brown-Skinned Palestinian Jew." Louis, we're very excited to hear your work.
Thank you, Dr. Lisa, and thank you for that beautiful tribute. Good afternoon, family. I am Lewis Knox, a first-year MDiv student here at Pacific School of Religion. I also serve as a deacon at City of Refuge United Church of Christ under the leadership of Bishop Yvette Flunder. I am a father of a 35-year-old son, Jason, my pride and joy, and the proud grandpa of 13-year-old boy and girl twins, Jason Jr. and Jordan. My passion in life is to be an agent of change, disrupting historical lies, white supremacy, and the marginalization of people, and creating a place where we all can flourish. Of course, PSR has been a vital part and continues to be a part of my journey in this direction. The title of my presentation is "Somebody Has Stolen Jesus: What is Problematic About a White Jesus and What Would It Mean If Jesus Had Remained a Brown-Skinned Palestinian Jew?" In the limited time I have to speak with you, I will reflect on the implications of Jesus being a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew rather than the historically inaccurate portrayal of a white Jesus that has become widely accepted. This reflection provides a snapshot of a larger work presented in Dr. Lisa's Christian ethics class last fall. I will argue 3 points. 1, the world would be more just and understanding towards people of color and other marginalized people because a brown-skinned Jesus would have forced all of us to stand in solidarity with the disadvantaged. 2, white supremacy would have been less effective in subjugating people of color and other marginalized because the Bible is replete with stories of the brown-skinned Jesus who challenged the oppressive status quo and spoke up against injustice. And 3, people of color and marginalized folks would experience greater self-esteem and greater political and cultural power because it is natural for people of color to emulate leaders who look like them and who have a track record of influencing social change. As a same-gender loving Black kid growing up in the poverty-stricken area of South Central Los Angeles in the 1970s, I was surrounded by images of a white Jesus in my foster home, in my Black church, and in every other Black church that I attended. These images were, and they continue to be, present in books, magazines, periodicals, and virtually everywhere in America and around the world. The portrait of a white Jesus is ubiquitous, never challenged or questioned. But as I grew older and I learned more about the Bible, the Middle East, including Africa, and the white power structure that we continue to confront today, it became clear that something was amiss. It became evidence that somebody had stolen Jesus and recast him as a white man with blue eyes. I have always viewed this distortion of Jesus as a significant injustice and something that must be disrupted, dismantled, and destroyed. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. reminds us that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I am deeply compassionate about challenging and disrupting the ideological portrait of Jesus as a white male figure. Engaging in open dialogue that questions and disrupts these viewpoints while promoting a more inclusive understanding of faith is essential for a better Christian life today and for the Christians that will follow us. Disrupting the myth of a white Jesus is critical and crucial aspect of Christian ethics. Now, if Jesus were widely depicted and recognized as a brown-skinned Palestinian, it would likely promote a more inclusive and diverse representation of Christianity. This shift would involve a greater focus on his solidarity with marginalized communities, a change in perspectives regarding colonialism and power dynamics within the faith, and possibly challenge the notion of a white Jesus that has historically dominated the Western world. The Bible describes Jesus as Jewish, suggesting that he likely had light to dark brown skin. However, some Black theologians assert that Jesus was Black, not to define his skin color, but to contest the traditional representation of Jesus as a white man. The Reverend Dr. James Cone, for example, was a Black theologian rooted in the 1960s civil rights movement. He is considered the father of Black liberation theology. When I say Jesus is Black and that God is Black, white theologians were outrageous, he said. They believe I had lost my theological mind. However, this was my way of expressing that Jesus was a Jew and that God identified with the oppressed. Dr. Cone's work was influential inside and outside African American theological communities. He inspired many people to dismantle white supremacy. Some say he opened spaces for others to find their theological voice. So in other words, Cone encouraged people to find a Christian ethic that worked for them. I am inspired by the work and life of Reverend James Cone because in him we see the brown Palestinian Jew who was on the side of the disadvantaged. Further, his work reminds us that Jesus, the Palestinian Jew who did not die merely to expound a spiritual gospel, Jesus was killed because he sided with the oppressed against the rich, the privileged, the powerful, and the Roman Empire. Jesus stood for the voiceless and the marginalized. He was ultimately put to death because he challenged the Roman system. If Jesus was more widely depicted and understood as a brown-skinned Palestinian, we would see more diverse religious imagery. Churches and religious art would portray Jesus with a Middle Eastern appearance, reflecting his ethnicity and geographic origins. This, in turn, would enhance the focus on social justice. The teachings of Jesus, particularly those advocating for the poor and oppressed, could be interpreted with a greater emphasis on social justice issues related to race, ethnicity, and economic inequality. I believe the Reverend Dr. Blake, our dearly departed, would agree with this sentiment because he was someone who specialized in teaching us lessons of love, compassion, truth-telling, and service. The depiction of a brown-skinned Palestinian Jesus could potentially break the stronghold of white supremacy and create a new conversation and Christian ethic relating to a new view of the divine. White supremacy has been able to flourish because colonizers were able to steal Jesus and reinvent him in their image and then use the re-imaging as a weapon against people of color. When we dismantle the image of a white Jesus, we allow the voice of the marginalized to rise and to see a brown-skinned Jesus who looks like them. In doing so, people of color will experience greater self-esteem, greater self-worth, and political and cultural power. When those on the margin can experience the power of and authority of someone who looks like them, they will grow in their ability to love themselves, and that love is contagious. If Jesus was widely depicted and understood as a brown-skinned Palestinian, we would have a powerful critique of colonialism. A brown-skinned Jesus would prompt critical reflection on how the image of a white Jesus has been used to legitimize colonial power structures and reinforce white supremacy. Consequently, white Christian communities in the Middle East might feel more represented and connected to the historical Jesus. Middle Easterners would likely reconnect with the many biblical stories where Jesus challenged the oppressive status quo and spoke up for injustice. While Jesus' appearance is significant, we will never lose contact with the core message of his teaching, which would remain the same, emphasizing love, emphasizing compassion, and emphasizing forgiveness. In sum, the presentation of a white Jesus has always been problematic. It has served as the basis of white supremacy and allowed one group of people to create a system of domination and oppression of people of color and those on the margin. The concept of whiteness is a subjective construct and lacks empirical support. By dismantling and disrupting the myth of a white Jesus and recognizing him as the brown-skinned Palestinian indeed he was, we paved the way for a greater solidarity amongst all people, foster a more just understanding of Christianity, and develop a new Christian ethic that values the contributions of everyone to the fabric of life, both today and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lewis Knox. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for this important work. I love this title. I just think it's worth saying again. Somebody has stolen Jesus.
Thank you.
What is problematic with a white Jesus, and what it would mean if Jesus had remained a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew. Thank you for the invitation to be with that challenge. I am excited now to welcome our next presenter, Jenny John, who's going to share a paper on queer theology and bomba artivism. And I won't give any more away. Jenny, all you. Thank you.
The skirts are waving, swirling, flowing, a kaleidoscope of colors making my eyes fuzzy and blurry. Blinking, I imagine the connection of the hues between these skirts and the aurora borealis way up north. There where the dancers hold their drums and are wrapped in animal skins which they hunted to eat and keep them warm. Once only a way of life, now is a protest against the colonizers who came to oppress them. Drumming, chanting, the northern lights as a backdrop. Here, the skirts are swaying in chaotic non-conformity, integrated body and soul with the beats. Each slap a reverberation that rumbles in the deepest being and echoes through the ages. Somehow, somewhere, a connection with Mother Earth, La Tierra, nuestras antepasadas, el norte y el sur. Sweat is dripping while faces are aching with smiles, shouts of praise in an altered sanctuary. Feet on the floor, feet on the ice, feet moving, hearts beating. It is an intervention, a bolus of music, a salve in the darkness, languages spilling out from the lips in a cacophony of worship. It's all so queer. Epistemology, see? That's sexy. Dance is a connection with the divine. We connect with the divine within us, within each other, across nations and skin color. This is church. You hear me? Church. This is church. Church. The tundra is church. The humidity of the Puerto Rican island is church. This museum is church. And those online watching live. The rebellion and the artivism and the music and the colors and the unity. This is church. This is bomba. Hello, I'm Jenny John, student here at Pacific School of Religion and pastor at Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ here in Idaho. This poem was written live during last year's artivism display of bomba at the Bade Museum at PSR. It's good to be with you all today, and thank you for being here. My bomba paper is an introduction to artivism, spun from this poem. It was written for Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake's Visions of Tomorrow class, his final course that he taught. My queer paper is an incorporation of my profession as a midwife and queer lesbian who has children. It was written for the queer theology course taught by Dr. Ish Ruiz. I will be presenting two papers for you today. Each of them were written independently, but what we have learned here in PSR in the stackable curriculum and what Dr. Dorsey Blake taught us so effortlessly and embodied and lived out is that everything builds upon the other. So I will present these papers and create a not before developed Venn diagram of the two. Finally, I will discuss artivism and how it reflects the public artivism Jesus displayed. I will discuss how queer families are created and leave you with an open-ended question that has been the foci of the LGBTQ plus community for forever. Lastly, I will recite my poem again for you as a bookend to remind you of what and where church actually is after the presentation of these topics, queering how families are created and artivism. The public act of artivism is a result of many hours of behind the scenes practicing, organizing, stretching skins across drums, and putting pencil to paper and aching over verb tenses. Artivism is an invitation to return to one's roots. Artivism shows up and transforms whatever space it appears into a sanctuary, a holy and worthy sanctuary with whomever is present, not dissimilar to what Jesus did when arriving on a donkey and taking a drink from a well with a stranger, or overturning tables in an otherwise sacred edifice. As I wrote in my paper, Bomba as protest and artivism quite literally bumps into the person next to you and forces a moment of forgiveness and grace that this seems a natural byproduct from the overarching drive of the dance and drumming and singing. Artivism pushes us around. It asks for forgiveness when it is needed, but allows for us to be angry when anger is what's required to get the art out there, to get the artivism out there, and to bring ancestors into our planned, spontaneous, makeshift sanctuaries. As Anna Marie Jagos states, and is quoted in my paper, the nature of a political intervention is not necessarily determined by the assumption of either position. I believe that artivism shows us that claiming and reclaiming doesn't have to look a certain way. Accessing sperm or egg outside of the heteronormative method is also artivism. I discuss in my paper, Queering How Families Are Created, that creating a baby as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, pregnancy is co-creation with the divine. I'll explain. Firstly, lesbians who have a uterus oftentimes find themselves in a fertility clinic when they want to get pregnant, sitting next to couples with infertility issues and diagnoses. The stigma of the infertile couple can be traumatizing enough. Sitting next to a fertile person who merely needs access to sperm harms both parties all the more. For the fertile female who is seeking a donor, the routine visit to a fertility clinic is anything but, because the negative stigma, if a person with fertility issues is pitied enough, this method of the costly fertility clinic for IVF or IUI places the queer person into a category that is imbalanced. She is not infertile. She's a lesbian, queer enough to insist on not participating in the heteronormative act of sexual intercourse to get pregnant and make a family. Artivism. The biomedical field has turned lesbians into patients and tagged us with the title of infertile, even without considering that our access to sperm is the problem. But queer people have used creative means of conception throughout history. Consider the ancient daughters of Lot in the biblical story in Genesis. Each of them had no access to sperm. And yet, through the violence of non-consensual incest with their father, they found a way to conceive. Lot's daughters were thinking and acting queerly out of necessity and were able to keep the family line alive, which was so important in that day and age. If that isn't queer, I don't know what is. We know that the label of infertile is another means to box people into a category of conformity or to resist doing the work it takes of recognizing people with rights to produce and have families of their own by those who choose not to understand and to be confined inside their own religious beliefs. So far, I've only discussed the queer concept of conception. How does this fit into how families are made? Queering how families are made is different than queers making a baby. We are queering how families are co-created with the divine, but what about all of the heteronormative people who have yet to do the work it takes to accept us? We who have done the queering our whole lives. Whose responsibility is it to educate the non-queers? I say we fight fire with fire and talk about the radical queerness of the virgin conception of Jesus. Even if you are of the persuasion that this isn't real, the world religion of Christianity is built upon this queer concept. So I ask you, whose responsibility is it to educate the non-queers, and how? The skirts are waving, swirling, flowing, a kaleidoscope of colors making my eyes fuzzy and blurry. Blinking, I imagine the connection of the hues between these skirts and the aurora borealis way up north. There, where the dancers hold their drums and are wrapped in animal skins which they hunted to eat and keep warm, once a way of life, now is a protest against the colonizers who came to oppress them. Drumming, chanting, the northern lights as a backdrop. Here, the skirts are swaying in a chaotic conformity, integrated body and soul with the beats, each slap a reverberation that rumbles in the deepest being and echoes through the ages. Somehow, somewhere, a connection with Mother Earth, la tierra, nuestras antepasadas, el norte y el sur. Sweat is dripping while faces are aching with smiles, shouts of praise in an altered sanctuary, feet on the floor, feet on the ice, feet moving, hearts beating. It is an intervention, a bolus of music, a salve in the darkness. Languages spilling out from the lips in a cacophony of worship. It's also queer. Epistemologies. See? That's sexy. Dance is a connection with the divine. We connect with the divine within us, within each other, across nations and skin color. This is church. Do you hear me? Church. This is church. Church. The tundra is church. The humidity of the Puerto Rican island is church. This museum is church. And all of us watching online, the rebellion and the artivism and the music and the colors and the unity. This is church. This is bomba. Thank you.
This is church. Wow. To be able to conjure that in this Zoom reality, I felt the colors, the rebellion, the music. And I love how the poetic voice, the poetic prophetic voice, the queer voice is really breaking through, thinking of, wisdom cries out in the public square. Thank you so much, Jenny, John. This is church. I look forward to witnessing all the iterations of this in the world. Our next paper, we're very excited to hear from Matthew White. who's going to be delivering a paper for us titled Agitation Awareness, Harnessing Regenerative Organizing for Transformative Change. Matthew.
So grateful to be here. My name is Matthew White. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a Demon candidate from Whittier, California. I'm honored to share with you an excerpt from my doctoral project on regenerative organizing. My discussion today, Agitation as Awareness, Harnessing Regenerative Organizing for Transformative Change, features a chapter from the project where I will today define the concept, frame it for a modern context, and then offer you a call to action. I'm a facilitator by nature and an organizer by trade, and my work for pay and for play is dedicated to the liberation of self for the betterment of the collective. I have a feeling everyone in this room has a similar dedication, and I'm so honored to share this call of action with you. Ready? Here it goes. It goes something like this. Life finds a way. Now, Jurassic Park fans might recognize that quote. It's a simple truth that underscores the resilience inherent in both nature and humanity, reminding us that regeneration and rebirth are woven into the very fabric of life. I'm exploring this interplay between the generative effects that occur when individuals unite for a common purpose and the transformative power of leadership grounded in generative principles. Recognizing that regenerative organizing acknowledges the necessity of dismantling and rebuilding systems to better serve the collective good, I aim to illuminate pathways toward a more equitable and just society. As in nature, we should prioritize the framing that we have what we need, remove what we do not need, and take what we must. I'll repeat that. As in nature, we should prioritize the framing that we have what we need, remove what we do not need, and only take what we must. Regenerative organizing is defined as an intentional, holistic approach that draws from the principles of nature to create resilient communities and empower individuals. This calls upon organizers to change their deeply held practices and determine their viability against the changing needs of the communities that we aim to serve. Through intentional practices rooted in mindfulness and resourcefulness, individuals can reclaim their power and forge structures that reflect their values and aspirations. Organizing should not merely be about responding to crises, but rather fostering a proactive mindset that prepares individuals and communities to engage with the challenges they face. Now, this is our problem and our bad habit. The prevailing challenge lies in our resilience on external catalysts to affirm our worth. History has shown us that social movements, be it civil rights movement, labor unions, or the fight for queer rights, have often emerged in responses to crises, forcing us to fight for what should already be our inherent rights. This cycle of reaction leaves us on the defense, addressing symptoms of oppression, rather than tackling root causes. Organizing has always been effective. Look what it's won us. Look what we've built as people. But it's time that we question the very machine that has historically dictated our struggles. In this context, we must embrace the radical notion of reimagination, critically assessing what no longer serves us and moving toward what does. Our choices, whether to engage with or interrupt the natural flow of community and growth, determine our capacity to be regenerative. By choosing to get out of our own way, we create the conditions necessary for flourishing, just as the natural world does. The concept of regeneration is rooted in agriculture and biology, where ecosystems possess built-in structures to sustain themselves. Now contrast that with our cultural and societal systems that often lack this inherent resilience, which is why we have to strive to mimic the natural world order in our organizing efforts. The concept of agitation is a vital organizing strategy. When we have what are called organizing conversations, agitation serves to illuminate the negative impacts of our current societal conditions, compelling individuals to confront realities that they face. It's during this critical phase that we ask the essential question, how long will we live this way? By highlighting the personal and collective ramifications of systemic oppression, we create a sense of urgency that galvanizes communities to take action. Yet, regenerative organizing represents a new spin on this age-old strategy. Simply relying on the same tactics of the past will no longer suffice. As we engage our community members, we must ensure that we ask the right questions, providing them with the opportunity to be transformed by the process they're about to embark upon. Regeneration is both a practice and a mindset, and while organizing seeks tangible outcomes, it's equally important to reinforce the question, what must change in order for us to sustain the life that we need? I want to give you an example of this agitation as an organizing strategy. Just a few months ago, a group of neo-Nazis supported by local police staged a demonstration on an overpass in Lincoln Heights, Ohio, a city primarily Black in population. As was the case in previous incidents, local police did nothing to prevent the neo-Nazis from harassing and intimidating the passersby. Rather than waiting for law enforcement to protect them, the community recognized that the traditional systems of support had failed them. The police, maintaining that there were good people on both sides, we've heard this before, were ineffective and moot. In this moment of agitation, residents decided to act themselves, confronting the hate as a united front. They broke the lines of police and forced the fascists to flee. Residents burned the hateful flags and lifted their voices in chant and song, seizing the energy away from their would-be oppressors. The residents of Lincoln Heights, aware of their own power and urgency of their situation, chose to organize creatively and courageously, an act that not only dismantled the immediate threat, but also signified a rejection of outdated paradigms governing their responses to injustice. As they surged forward, they embodied a new model of organizing that aligns with the principles of regeneration, one that is adaptive, responsive, and rooted in the natural cycles of life and community. Now, the poetic justice of all of this is that the late Nikki Giovanni, a poet and civil rights soldier, was born in Lincoln Heights. Her legacy serves as a powerful reminder that the fight is often rooted in the very soil of our communities. The residents' responses not only honored Giovanni's spirit, but it also illustrates the regenerative cycle of agitation and action, where the discomfort of systemic oppression catalyzes a transformation that calls for new approaches to organizing. In recognizing that traditional methods were insufficient, they embraced the opportunity to dismantle the systems that no longer served them, waiting for someone to save them, right? Paving the way for a more inclusive and adaptive framework that honors the interconnectedness of their struggles. In the landscape of social justice and activism, few figures embody the complexities of principled resistance as profoundly as Nikki Giovanni. Her public blacklisting during the 1980s, particularly surrounding her refusal to participate in apartheid demonstrations, served as a poignant case study in the intersection of spirituality, pragmatism, and the philosophy of regenerative organizing. In 1986, a controversial leaflet circulated outside a performance by Giovanni at Cal State Long Beach, boycotting her work. Now, this backlash stemmed from her admission that she, yes, had visited South Africa in 1974, a trip that occurred against the backdrop of the United Nations campaign to isolate the apartheid regime. While Giovanni was unequivocally opposed to apartheid, her reluctance to engage in protests on American soil led many to accuse her of undermining the efforts of civil rights leaders. Giovanni's decision was rooted in pragmatic assessment of the effectiveness of the movements of the United States. She perceived a disconnect between the celebrity-led protests and the genuine activism necessary for meaningful change. In her view, the American civil rights movement often reacted to injustices without addressing its own systemic flaws. Giovanni articulated a belief that true evolutionary potential existed within the Black community itself, stating, "We need to save ourselves." This assertion reflects a fundamental tenet of regenerative leadership, the understanding that the resources needed for success are already within us. Her critique of the organizing methods prevalent at that time revealed a deeper insight into the nature of power and agency. She argued that the spectacle of celebrity activism often overshadowed the grassroots work necessary for sustainable change. She said that without recognizing our own agency, we remain perpetually reactive, dependent upon external aggressors or catalysts to validate our power. That perspective challenges the traditional notions of organizing, urging us to consider what it means to lead from a place of intrinsic strength rather than external validation. The backlash Giovanni faced tells a broader story about the societal tendency to uphold established systems without even questioning their efficacy. In this case, the system was the organizing machine itself. Her blacklisting serves as a reflection of the collective agreement that the prevailing methods of activism were the only legitimate pathways to progress. And as regenerative leaders, it's crucial to identify and dismantle those parts of the organizing machine that no longer serve us. Yes, still organize, but look at how you're doing it. We must not only remove ineffective tools, but also cultivate an awareness of the resources we already possess to ensure that our organizing efforts can thrive independently of outdated paradigms. In the realm of regenerative organizing, Giovanni's insights resonate deeply. Organizers of today often find themselves in a constant search for proof of progress, turnout numbers, research findings, anecdotal evidence to serve as benchmarks for our successes. However, it's essential to recognize that true growth is not solely measured by external metrics, but also by an internal transformation that aligns with aspirations. A little harder to measure, right? Giovanni was not merely an agitator, she was a visionary, advocating for a shift in how we understand and measure progress in our movements. As we engage with her legacy, we affirm that the world and the people within it deserve better than reactive existence. Together, we can cultivate a movement that not only responds to challenges, but thrives in the face of them, ensuring that our social movements do not stagnate, but evolve in ways that honor our collective aspirations, motivated by the power of reimagination and regeneration. I thank you for letting me speak to you about this.
Wow, thank you so much, Matthew, for your, I know this also comes from, many years of experience, and being able to witness the gaps that are there. And so thank you for the theory and praxis that you have been developing and continue to hone so that our movements can be healthy and sustainable for the long haul. Thank you for sharing that and for all that you do. I am now very honored and excited and proud of all of you to welcome our last paper for today, for the 2025 Unafraid Symposium. We are now going to hear from Barb Kraft on an emerging vision for tomorrow. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you, Dr. Lisa. Good afternoon. I'm Barb Kraft, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm joining you from the island of Oahu in the Aloha state of Hawaii. As a retired Navy veteran, retired nurse, and healthcare administrator educated here in the islands, I've embraced the call to hospital ministry as a chaplain to give back to the people of Hawaii who have shaped my sense of belonging, to include